She was alone in her kitchen, humming an old hymn, hands deep in bread dough, not looking for love, not expecting anything to change. He was just a hungry cowboy who followed the smell of baking bread to a stranger's door. She could have turned him away. He could have ridden on. But she opened the door, and he stepped in. From that one small moment of simple kindness, a dynasty was born. This is the story of what happens when two people choose each other not once, but every single morning for 53 years. This story reminds us that a lifetime of love doesn't begin with a perfect moment. It begins with the courage to open the door to one. This is a channel for those who believe the truest love stories aren't written in grand gestures. If Hannah and Wade's story warmed something deep in your heart, let them know it mattered and subscribe so you never miss the next story waiting at your door.
Flower dust danced in the sunbeams that cut through her kitchen window. Hannah Norwood's voice, singing an old hymn her mama taught her, was the only other thing moving in the little ranch house. For 3 long months, she had been on her own since her daddy passed, leaving her this patch of land 10 miles outside South Pass City, Wyoming. Some nights, the quiet was a heavy blanket, but she found her peace in the daily rhythm, in the simple feel of working dough. The world outside was still a wild place in the year 1878. Just as the bread was on its second rise, she heard a horse coming, its hooves breaking the silence on the dry ground. Wiping her hands on her apron, she peered toward the door, wondering who would ride out so far on a Tuesday. Wade Northfield had been in the saddle since first light, riding the fence line of the Patterson place where he was the foreman. He spent his days looking for sagging posts or broken wire that might tempt a cow to wander. He was a hard-earned 26, tall and lean, with dark hair that curled just over his collar and eyes the color of a summer creek. He smelled the bread before he even saw the house, a scent that made his stomach rumble. He realized he had left before breakfast, eager to get his work done. The small ranch house looked tucked into the sage-covered hills, a thin ribbon of smoke rising from its chimney. He turned his horse toward it, pulled by both hunger and a simple curiosity, without giving it a second thought. Hannah heard the knock and took a moment to smooth her hair down. She tucked a stray piece behind her ear before opening the door. The fella on her porch was a stranger, but his face looked decent and plain-spoken, the kind of face that knew a long day's work. He pulled off his hat right away, showing off those dark curls, and gave a small smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Ma'am, forgive me for bothering you," he said, his voice a little rough, like he talked more to cattle than to people. "I've been riding fences since sunup, and I caught a whiff of your bacon. I was hoping you might have a loaf to spare. I can surely pay." Hannah looked him over for a second. His clothes were worn but clean, and he kept a respectful distance, twisting the brim of his hat in his hands. Her daddy always said you could judge a man by how he treated folks who couldn't do anything for him. This one was asking, not demanding, and that meant something to her. "I have bread cooling now," she said, taking a step back to open the door wider. "You're welcome to a piece, and I won't hear of taking your money for it. Come on in and have a seat while I get you a slice." Wade paused just a second before stepping inside, his boots making a loud sound on the wood floor. The house was tiny, but kept as neat as a pin, with lace curtains on the windows and a colorful rag rug in the main room. In one corner was the kitchen, and he saw 2 golden-crusted loaves resting on a table, steam still rising off them. The woman moved like she knew exactly what she was doing, cutting thick slices onto a blue-edged plate. She then set out a crock of butter and a jar of honey. "Sit down," she said, pointing to the table, and he did as he was told. He set his hat on his knee. She put the plate down in front of him with the butter and honey and then poured him a tin cup of water from a pitcher. "I'm Hannah Norwood. My daddy owned this place till he passed back in November." "I am real sorry to hear that," Wade said, and he truly was. He'd lost his own father to a lung sickness 2 years back, and knew that empty feeling all too well. My name is Wade Northfield. I'm the foreman over at the Patterson Ranch, about 5 miles east of here. Hannah gave a little nod and sat in the chair across from him. She watched him spread butter on the warm bread and take the first bite. She saw his eyes close for just a moment, and a little bit of pride swelled up inside her. Baking was one thing she knew she did right, a skill her mother left her before a fever took her when Hannah was 16. Hannah was 22 now, which some folks considered an old maid, but she never did pay that talk much mind. She'd been too busy helping her father run their place, learning about cattle and chickens and all the never-ending chores that keep a ranch going. "This is the best bread I've tasted in a good long while," Wade said after he swallowed. "You've got a gift for it." "Thank you," Hannah said, feeling her cheeks get a little warm from his words. "I usually bake about 3 times a week. It keeps pretty good, and I trade a few loaves in town for things I need." They talked while he finished his slices, and the conversation came easier than either of them figured it would. He told her about his work on the Patterson Ranch, the trouble of keeping cattle healthy and fences mended in this high country with its harsh winters and blistering summers. She told him about figuring out how to run the ranch by herself with her small herd of cattle and the chickens that gave her eggs to trade. The longer they spoke, the more Wade watched her face. He noticed the way her eyes seemed to brighten when she talked about her home, and the gentle curve of her lips when she smiled at something he said. When he finally stood up to go, the sun was much higher in the sky. He knew he had stayed longer than he should have, but he found he didn't much want to get back on his horse and ride off. A part of him wanted to stay right there in that warm kitchen with this woman who hummed when she baked and spoke about the land with such a quiet strength. "Thank you for the bread and the conversation," he said, putting his hat back on. "I don't suppose I could trouble you for some again another time. I could pay you back with some repair work or any heavy lifting you might need done." Hannah thought about his offer. She knew it was more than just about work. It was an excuse for him to come back, a way for them to see each other again. She hadn't felt a pull toward any man in longer than she could remember, and she had mostly accepted she would live her life out here alone. But something about Wade Northfield made her want to think on that again, made her curious about the man with the creek water eyes. "I could use some help with the chicken coop," she said, speaking slowly. "The door's coming loose at the hinges, and I haven't been able to fix it right myself. If you wanted to stop by on Saturday afternoon, I could pay you with more bread and a hot supper." "That sounds more than fair to me," Wade said, and the smile he gave her was honest and warm. "I'll see you on Saturday, then." She watched him ride off, the dust kicking up from his horse's hooves, and waited until he was just a speck on the horizon before she went back inside. The bread needed wrapping, and other chores were waiting. But her thoughts kept circling back to their talk, to the kindness in his voice when he mentioned his own father, and the respect he had shown her from the moment he knocked. She started humming again as she worked, but it was a different song this time, one that sounded a lot more like hope. Saturday took its sweet time getting there. Hannah was up before the sun and went about her chores with a new kind of energy. She fed the chickens, gathered the eggs, checked on her cattle, and pulled weeds from the little vegetable patch behind the house. She baked a fresh batch of bread that morning and put a venison roast in the oven to cook low and slow all afternoon, adding potatoes and carrots from her cellar. She told herself it was just good manners, that she'd do the same for anybody who came to help out. But she changed her dress twice before deciding on a dark blue calico that she knew made her eyes look bluer. Wade showed up mid-afternoon, just like he said he would, on the same solid bay horse. He had a small toolbox tied on behind his saddle. He had clearly taken some care himself, with a close shave and a clean shirt on, and his best hat was brushed clean of dust. When Hannah opened the door, he felt his breath catch just a little seeing her in that blue dress, with her honey-colored hair pulled back and soft wisps framing her face. "The chicken coop is out back," she said, and she led him through the house and out the other side. The coop was sturdy enough but showing its years, and he saw right away what she meant about the door. The old leather hinges were dry and cracked, and the wooden frame was a little warped. It was nothing he couldn't fix. It would probably take him an hour, working at a good pace. I can mend this, he told her. Do you have any leather scraps? I'll need to plane down this edge a bit where it's swollen. There's leather in the barn, Hannah said. My daddy kept all sorts of supplies for fixing tack. I can show you. They walked over to the small barn together, and Wade watched how she moved around her own property with such purpose. She pointed out where she kept things and explained how she had everything organized. He found what he needed and went back to the chicken coop while she returned to the house to see about supper. He worked with a steady hand, feeling her presence even when she was out of sight, completely aware that he was on her land, in her world. The job went quick, and when he tested the newly fixed door, it clicked home with a satisfying thud. He was wiping down his tools when Hannah came out of the house with 2 mugs of coffee. She passed one to him and stood there looking over his work. Now that is a world of difference, she said with a smile. I've just been propping it shut with a board. Those raccoons were getting smarter by the day. This ought to hold 'em, Wade said, tasting the coffee. It was brewed dark and strong, just the way he preferred. That leather's thick. It'll see you through a few years if you treat it with oil now and then. They stood together in a peaceful quiet, watching the sun set over her property. The evening light made everything look golden, and the air had that clean, crisp feeling you only get up high in dry country. Wade found himself hoping for another task, any reason to make this quiet moment last. Supper will be on the table shortly, Hannah said, almost like she heard his thoughts. Would you like to clean up at the pump? They sat at her small kitchen table. The roast was tender and full of flavor, and the vegetables were cooked just right. Wade couldn't recall the last time he'd had a meal this fine. It had surely been nothing like this since his mother passed 5 years back. The hands at the Patterson Ranch all took their turn at cooking, and while they kept everybody fed, not a single one of them had a gift for it. You're a wonderful cook, he told her honestly. This is a true feast. I do love to cook when there is somebody to share it with, Hannah confessed. It just doesn't seem as worthwhile when it is only for me. The talk over dinner drifted over all sorts of things. She was curious about his duties on the Patterson Ranch, and he told her about the rhythm of the work, how the seasons change things, and the good feeling of working with the land and the animals. He asked about what she planned for her place, and she talked of wanting a bigger herd, maybe adding some more chickens or giving pigs a try. It is just hard to keep up with it all alone, she admitted. My father and I, we worked side by side and split up the chores. Now it feels like I'm always behind, with more to do than daylight to do it in. You could hire on some help, Wade suggested. There are always fellas in South Pass City looking for work. Maybe so, Hannah said, but she sounded unsure. I do not know if I could afford to pay a fair wage. And having a stranger, a man I don't know from Adam, living right here on my land. She let the words hang in the air, but he knew what she meant. Wade understood completely. A woman living by herself had to be mindful of her reputation and how things looked. One wrong step or a bad choice, and the town gossips would have a field day. It was not right. But it was the way things were. I could help out when I have free time, he offered, choosing his words carefully. The Patterson place is not too far. I could ride over on a Sunday afternoon, help with the heavier jobs. You could pay me with a good meal, or we could just call it being neighborly. Hannah looked at him across the table, trying to read his intentions to see if he was sincere. What she found in his eyes put her at ease. There was genuine interest for sure, but also a deep respect and an honest wish to help. She made up her mind right then, trusting her gut. I would like that very much, she said. But I have to insist on paying you proper, either with money or in trade. I will not have you thinking I am taking advantage of your kindness. They settled on the details over coffee and slices of a fine apple pie Hannah pulled from her cabinet. Wade would come over on Sunday afternoons when he had the time to spare. He would help with tasks that needed an extra pair of hands or more muscle than she had. She would give him supper and trade him fresh bread, eggs, or vegetables when she had extra. It was a good deal that helped them both, and if it was also a fine excuse to spend time together, Well, neither of them said that part out loud. The weeks that came after settled into a routine that felt comfortable and right. Wade came over most Sundays. He missed one now and then when ranch business held him up, but he usually showed up in the mid-afternoon with his tools, ready to take on whatever job Hannah had lined up for him that week. He mended fence posts, strengthened the barn door, and helped her move a heavy old dresser that had been her folks'. She always fed him well and sent him back to the ranch with fresh-baked bread, jars of jam, or eggs packed carefully in straw. They would talk as they worked, and they learned about each other's pasts and dreams. Wade told her about being raised on a little farm back in Missouri, and how he came out west after his parents died. He just needed a fresh start, a way to get away from the memories that filled up every corner of that old place. He had bounced between different ranch jobs before Patterson made him foreman. He had shown he was dependable and good with both cattle and men. Hannah told her own story about her mother dying when she was just a girl, and how she and her father got so close in the years after. He had taught her all about running a ranch, and never once made her feel like she could not handle it because she was a woman. His passing had broken her heart, but in a funny way it also set her free. It let her make her own decisions about her life and her future. As the spring of 1878 warmed into summer, their friendship grew into something deeper, though neither of them was in a hurry to put a name on it. Wade found his thoughts drifting to Hannah during his long work days, and he looked forward to Sundays with a feeling that was new to him. Hannah noticed she was humming to herself more often. She started planning meals she thought he would especially like, and picking out dresses she felt pretty in. It was in early June that everything changed between them. Wade had been helping Hannah put in a new patch of garden. They were both working under the warm sun, with their hands buried in the rich, dark soil. When they were done, hot and tired, Hannah fetched a pitcher of cold water from the spring house and 2 glasses. They sat in the cool shade of the house, drinking it down. Wade found himself just watching the curve of her neck, and the way little damp curls of hair stuck to her forehead. "Hannah," he said, and his voice sounded a little rough. She turned to face him, and something she saw in his eyes made her hold her breath. "I need to say something, and I truly hope it does not make things strange between us." "What is it?" she asked. But she had a feeling she already knew. She could see it in how intensely he was looking at her. "I have grown to care for you a great deal," Wade said, the words tumbling out. "More than just a friend or a neighbor. These last few months, getting to know you, spending this time with you, it has come to mean the world to me. I think about you all the time, and I know if I do not tell you how I feel, I will live to regret it. I will understand if you do not feel the same. If that is how it is, I will respect that, and we can go on just like we have been. But I had to let you know." Hannah put her glass down, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this was coming. She had sensed something building between them, in the way his hand stayed a moment longer helping her from a wagon, in the way his gaze followed her. And she had felt that same strong pull, a feeling that ran much deeper than just being neighbors. "I care for you as well," she said in a low voice. "I was too scared to say it, even to myself. After my daddy passed, I figured I would be alone for good, that my chance for a husband and children was gone. But then you came along and changed all that. I look forward to you coming by more than words can say. When you are gone, I just find myself wishing you were here. I wonder what you would make of things that happen. I imagine sharing stories and hearing that laugh of yours." Wade shifted nearer, reaching out for her hand. She let him take it, feeling the tough skin on his palm, the solidness in his grip. "Can I start calling on you proper?" he asked. "With an eye toward marriage, that is, if you will agree to it." "Yes," Hannah said, the word leaving her without a thought. "Yes, I would like that an awful lot." He lifted her hand to his mouth, placing a soft kiss on her knuckles, and the kindness of it made her eyes well up. They sat near each other in the shade, their hands joined, speaking of what all this meant and what they both hoped for. Wade made it plain that he admired her grit, that he would never expect her to let go of her ranch or become someone she was not. Hannah spoke of her wish for a true partner, to make a life together instead of just fitting into his. The courting that came after was both tender and earnest. They both understood they were not kids anymore and that they knew their own hearts and what they wanted. Wade began visiting more than just on Sundays, riding his horse over after his own work was done, always with some small token. Like wildflowers he had picked along the trail, a new ribbon for her hair he bought in South Pass City, or a book of poems he thought she would like. Hannah baked his favorite pies, mended his work shirts when they got torn, and truly listened to his stories about the ranch and the world beyond her own piece of land. They were careful to do everything right and proper. They always left the door open when he was in the house and made sure he was gone long before dark to keep the gossips from talking. But they still found their own private moments. They would hold hands walking across her land, or he would put his arm around her shoulders as they sat and watched the sun go down. They stole kisses out in the barn that got a little longer and a little deeper with every passing week. Toward the end of July, Wade went and spoke to Mr. Patterson about his plans. The older man was mighty pleased, for he had known The foreman had been making regular trips out to the Norwood place and thought the match was a fine idea. He offered Wade a little house on the ranch, sitting empty, said they could move in after they tied the knot. Wade explained that Hannah had her own spread and might want to stay put. "Whatever you two work out is all right by me," Patterson said with a warm smile. "You are a good man, Northfield, and you deserve some happiness. If you need time off for a wedding trip, just say the word." Wade thanked him kindly and rode straight for Hannah's ranch, getting there just as she was pulling bread from the oven. She looked up, surprised to see him so early, and saw the pure excitement shining in his face. "I spoke with Patterson," he said, getting right to it. "He's given us his blessing and offered us a house, though I told him you've got your own land. Hannah, I know we've only been courting for a couple of months, but I'm as sure as the sunrise about my feelings. I want to marry you and build a life with you. Will you be my wife?" Hannah put down the warm loaf and walked over to him, her hands still dusted with flour. "I will marry you," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I love you, Wade Northfield, and I want nothing more than to be your wife." He wrapped her up in a big hug, lifting her clean off the floor and spinning her round while she laughed with pure delight. When he set her down, he gave her a deep kiss that tasted of flour and honey and happiness. They just stood there, holding each other for a long while, both feeling the weight and wonder of the promise they just made and the future that lay ahead. They settled on a September wedding, giving them enough time to prepare without dragging it out. She wanted to get hitched in the little church in South Pass City, with the same minister who'd presided over her daddy's funeral. Wade was quick to agree, wanting nothing more than to make her happy. Word got round the small town faster than a tumbleweed in a dust storm. Hannah did not have many close friends, but the townsfolk liked her well enough from her visits to trade. Wade was known as a hard-working, honest fella. A few of the town's women offered to help Hannah get ready, sharing recipes and advice on making a home. Mrs. Patterson, the ranch owner's wife, gave Hannah a beautiful quilt that had been in her family for generations, calling it a wedding present and welcoming her to their big ranch family. August flew by in a flurry of getting things ready. Hannah sewed herself a new dress for the day, picking out a soft cream-colored fabric that suited her perfectly. Wade got his time off from work approved and made plans for their short wedding trip. They decided Hannah would keep her ranch, but they would live mainly on the Patterson property in the house he'd offered. It was closer to Wade's work and would just make things easier day to day. They would use her place for extra income, keeping the chickens and small herd there and riding over regular to keep it up. All these practical talks were mixed in with sweet stolen moments. Both of them were looking forward to their wedding night when they could finally be together as one. Wade was always a gentleman, never pushing her past what was proper. But Hannah could see the want in his eyes and felt the same stirring inside her. The waiting was a sweet kind of torture, the anticipation growing with every sunset. Their wedding morning dawned bright and beautiful, the September sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. Hannah woke up early in her own ranch house for the last time as a single woman. She took her time getting ready, soaking in the copper tub and washing her hair, then carefully putting on her new dress. Mrs. Patterson's daughter, Clara, came by to help with her hair, pinning it up real elegant-like and tucking in tiny white flowers they'd picked from the hills. Wade spent the morning over at the main ranch trying to keep busy with small chores, but mostly just watching the clock. He had on new clothes he'd bought just for this day: dark trousers, a clean white shirt, and a charcoal gray vest. His hands were shaking a little as he tied his necktie, and Patterson clapped him on the shoulder with a chuckle. "Steady on, son," the old rancher said. "She's already said yes. All you gotta do now is show up and say the words." "I know," Wade said back, a nervous smile on his face. "I just want everything to be perfect for her." The little church was packed with friendly faces when Wade got there. He stood up front with the minister, his heart pounding like a drum, until the door swung open. And there was Hannah, on the arm of Mr. Patterson, who'd offered to walk her down the aisle since her father was gone. Wade plain forgot how to breathe for a second, seeing her in that cream dress with flowers in her hair, her face just beaming with love and joy. She caught his eye and smiled, and the whole world just faded away. It was only the two of them and the promises they were about to make. The ceremony was simple and full of heart. They said the old traditional vows, promising to love and honor each other, to stick together no matter what life threw their way. When the minister declared them man and wife, and Wade kissed his bride, the whole church broke out in happy cheers. They walked back down that aisle holding hands, both of them grinning from ear to ear, and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun as Mr. and Mrs. Northfield. A nice little reception followed at the Patterson Ranch, with plenty of food and drink and dancing in the big barn, all cleaned out and decorated for them. Hannah danced with her new husband, then with Mr. Patterson and a few other ranchers. Wade danced with Mrs. Patterson and Clara, but his eyes were always searching for Hannah, finding her again and again across the busy room. As the sun started to set, they slipped away, riding together on Wade's horse toward the little house that was now their home. Somebody had already been there, lighting the lamps and building a warm fire, leaving covered dishes of food and a bottle of wine on the table. The bed was made with fresh sheets and the quilt from Mrs. Patterson. Wade carried Hannah right over the threshold, and they both laughed at the old tradition. He set her down easy in the main room, and just like that, the laughter faded as they stood there, finally alone, finally married. Nothing stood between them, and showing the love they felt. "You nervous?" Wade asked, real soft, lifting his hands to her face. "A little," Hannah confessed. "But mostly I'm just happy. I've waited for this. For you. I love you, Wade." "I love you too," he answered, leaning down to kiss her. "More than I ever knew a man could love someone. I promise I'll spend my life doing everything I can to make you happy." They undressed each other slow-like, taking their time to explore and discover, to finally say with their bodies what they had held back for months. Wade was gentle and patient, making sure Hannah felt treasured and safe. Hannah answered with a fire that surprised them both, giving herself completely to him and the moment. They came together with love and tenderness, and afterward they just laid there in each other's arms, tired and perfectly content. "That was worth the wait," Hannah whispered against his chest, and she felt the deep rumble of his laugh. "It sure was," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. "And now we've got a whole lifetime to keep on discovering each other." They spent their first few married days mostly by themselves, getting to know their new home and each other, learning the rhythm of sharing a life. Wade taught Hannah things about his work she'd never known, explaining the money side of ranching and the troubles Patterson had to deal with. Hannah shared what she knew about gardening and putting up food, her way with animals and the land. They talked for hours about their hopes for the future, about the children they dreamed of having, and about building something that would last. After a week, Wade went back to work, and they settled into their married life. Hannah spent her days running their home, cooking and cleaning, but also helping with ranch chores when they needed an extra hand. She tended a big garden behind their little house, canning food for the winter. A couple times a week, she and Wade would ride out to her old ranch to look after the animals and keep up the place. That first winter together was a rough one, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them stuck inside for days on end. But Hannah found she loved those times they were snowed in. Loved sitting by the fire with Wade while a blizzard howled outside, reading a book out loud or just talking. They had a quiet Christmas with the Pattersons and the other ranch families, swapping small gifts and sharing big meals. Come January of 1879, Hannah started to think she might be expecting. She waited till she was good and sure before she told Wade, not wanting to get his hopes up for nothing. When she finally told him the news one night after supper, his reaction was everything she'd dreamed of. He was filled with pure joy, but also a healthy dose of worry for her. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, pulling her in close. "You ought to see the doctor in town." "I feel just fine," Hannah promised him, laughing at how nervous he'd suddenly become. "Honey, women have been having babies since the good Lord made dirt. I'm strong and healthy, but you're right. I'll see the doctor just to make sure things are coming along as they should." As her time drew closer, Wade got even more protective. He'd fret about her doing any heavy work, always telling her to rest when she felt just fine. Hannah took his fussing with a smile, knowing it came from a place of love and a deep fear of losing her or the little one. She kept up with her chores, but she did let Wade take on the heavier loads she'd usually handle herself. Springtime breathed new life into the prairie, and a new life was growing right inside of Hannah. She felt good for most of the time, with just a touch of sickness or weariness now and then. She stitched together baby clothes and quilts, getting ready for the new arrival with a practical heart. Mrs. Patterson and the other ranch wives gave her advice and a helping hand, sharing stories of their own babies. Then in early August, 3 weeks before her due date, Hannah's labor started in the dead of night. Wade woke up to her breathing hard through the pains, and a wave of panic washed over him before he shook it off and got his wits about him. He rode like the wind to fetch Mrs. Patterson and the doctor from town. He hurried back to be with Hannah, holding her hand and giving her what small comfort he could. The labor was a long and hard road, going all day and deep into the next night. Wade never left her side, not even when Mrs. Patterson suggested he might be more comfortable in the other room. He flat out refused to leave, feeling he had to be there to help her through this trial. She took strength from him being there, squeezing his hand through the worst of the pains, finding courage in his steady eyes. Their son was born just past midnight, coming into the world with a healthy cry that filled their little home. The doctor laid him in Hannah's arms, and she looked down at that tiny, wrinkled face with a love so big it hurt. Wade knelt by the bed, tears running freely down his cheeks, and he touched the baby's impossibly small hand with a single gentle finger. "He's perfect," Wade whispered. "You did amazing. I love you so much." They named him Samuel, after Wade's father, and gave him the middle name of Thomas, after Hannah's father. Sam was a healthy little fella with a big appetite and strong lungs, keeping his folks up many a night in those first weeks. Hannah bounced back well from the birth, getting her strength back and finding her footing as a new mother. Wade was a loving father, helping with the baby whenever he wasn't working. He'd walk the floor with a fussy Sam and change his clothes without a single complaint. The months flew by in a flurry of sleepless nights and little firsts. Sam's first smile, the first time he slept clear through the night, his little attempts to roll over and finally sit up on his own. Hannah and Wade cherished every new thing, finding joy in the smallest changes. Their love for each other grew even deeper as they learned to be parents together, working like a team to care for their son. When Sam turned 6 months old, they could finally start thinking about a future past, just getting by and caring for a baby. Wade had been socking away money, and they talked about maybe expanding their place, buying more land next to Hannah's ranch, or maybe getting more cattle. Hannah had kept on baking her bread when she found a spare moment, and some folks in South Pass City wanted to buy it from her every week. They talked about turning that into a small business, something Hannah could run from the house while she looked after Sam. Life fell into a nice, steady rhythm. Wade kept on as foreman, earning Patterson's trust and respect with his hard work and good sense. Hannah ran their home and slowly built her bread business, selling to the general store and a couple of restaurants in town. The money wasn't a fortune, but it meant something, giving her a purpose outside of being a wife and mother. Sam grew from a baby into a toddler, starting to walk and talk, keeping them on their toes with his boundless energy and curiosity. In the spring of 1881, Hannah found out she was expectant again. This time, the news wasn't such a surprise, but it brought just as much joy. Sam was nearly 2 years old enough to be a little more self-sufficient, and they felt it was the right time to grow their family. Wade was tickled pink at the thought of another child, hoping this time for a little girl, though he swore he would be just as happy with another boy. This pregnancy seemed to go easier than the first one. Maybe it was because Hannah knew what was coming and didn't worry over every little ache and pain. She kept right on working through it all, baking and looking after Sam and keeping the house. Wade was still watchful but not as worried, trusting that Hannah knew her own body. Their daughter was born in November of 1881, arriving a sight quicker than Sam had, with a lot less fuss and trouble. She was smaller than her brother, with fine dark hair and her daddy's creekwater blue eyes. They named her Margaret, but called her Maggie right from the start. Sam was taken with his tiny new sister, always wanting to touch her and help take care of her. With two little ones, life got a whole lot busier. Sometimes Hannah felt like she was being pulled in a dozen directions at once, but Wade was always her rock, helping out however he could and never making her feel like she wasn't enough. They were true partners, sharing the chores and duties, making decisions together about their children and their life. The years just seemed to melt away, marked by birthdays and holidays and all the little ups and downs of family life. Sam started school in South Pass City, riding into town with his father most days. Maggie grew from a baby to a toddler, and then a little girl just full of spunk and opinions. Wade got a big promotion when Patterson made him a part owner of the ranch, recognizing his years of good work and smart leadership. The extra money let them fix up their house, adding another bedroom and making the kitchen bigger. Hannah's bread business kept on growing, and she finally hired 2 other women to help her bake, turning it into a real little company that supplied most of the town. She was proud of what she'd built, taking a simple skill and making a real living from it. Wade always supported her business, never once feeling like her success took anything away from him. In 1885, when Sam was 6 and Maggie was 4, they decided to build a brand new house on Hannah's original ranch property. They needed more room for their growing family and liked the thought of being on their own land instead of Patterson's. Wade worked with some local fellas to draw up plans for a bigger house with plenty of space for the kids, a big kitchen for Hannah's baking, and a separate office for the ranch business. The move was a whirlwind, but an exciting one. They spent weeks hauling their things over and setting up the new place, getting the kids settled in their new rooms. Sam was thrilled to have more space to run around, and Maggie just loved having her own room to play in. Wade put up a bigger barn and added on to the chicken coops, making room for more livestock. Hannah set up a real commercial kitchen for her bread business with several ovens and plenty of workspace for her helpers. Life in their new home was mighty good. Wade still worked hand in hand with Patterson, but he had more freedom to run things his own way. Hannah's business was doing great, and she took pride in hiring other women and selling a good product to her neighbors. Their children grew up healthy and happy. Sam started showing a real interest in ranching, learning from his dad. Maggie had a knack for baking and was often in the kitchen helping her mother. Then, in 1887, Hannah found out she was pregnant again. This time it was a real surprise and came later in life than they ever figured. She was 31 years old. Wade was 35, and they had figured their family was complete. But this surprise baby, after the initial shock, was a welcome blessing. Sam and Maggie were excited about a new brother or sister, though Sam was pulling for a boy, while Maggie made her case for a girl. This pregnancy was harder than the other two, and Hannah felt more tired and uncomfortable. Wade was worried sick the whole time, remembering how hard Sam's birth had been and fearing trouble. But Hannah stayed calm and sure, trusting her body and the good doctor who looked after her. Their second son, William, was born in early 1888. He arrived during a spring snowstorm that made getting the doctor out to the ranch a real adventure. The labor was quick, thank goodness. and Will was healthy and strong from his first breath. Sam and Maggie were just smitten with their new brother, taking turns holding him and helping to care for him. At 8 and 6 years old, they were old enough to be a real help, and Hannah was grateful for it. The house that had seemed so big, the house suddenly felt full to bursting, alive with the racket and spirit of 3 little ones. Wade just plain thrived in that happy chaos, loving every bit of the noise and the feeling of family. There were days Hannah felt stretched mighty thin, what with her business, the house, and the children. But she had good help from her workers and from Wade, who was always a hands-on and steady partner. The years spent raising their children were built from countless small moments that added up to a whole life. Teaching Sam how to handle a horse, watching Maggie bake her first loaf of bread, seeing Will take his wobbly first steps. They weathered the fear of childhood sicknesses together. They dealt with squabbles and discipline, and the never-ending juggle of work and home. But through it all, Hannah and Wade stood as one, their love growing deeper with every passing year. As the children got older, they started finding their own places in the family businesses. Sam worked right alongside his father, learning the ins and outs of ranching and handling cattle. Maggie helped out in the bakery, showing a real knack for it, and soon took over running some of the day-to-day work. Will, being the youngest, spent his time between the two, curious about everything and ready to learn. In 1895, when Sam turned 16, he asked his folks if he could take on a bigger role at the ranch. He was a tall, strong boy, sensible and older than his years. Wade and Hannah talked it over and decided to let him supervise a few of the ranch hands, giving him a chance to show he could lead. Sam stepped up to the challenge, and it filled Wade with a deep pride to see his son becoming such a capable young man. At 14, Maggie officially became her mother's business partner, taking over the production schedule and making sure everything from the bakery was top-notch. She had her mother's gift and strong work ethic, and Hannah trusted her judgment completely. They worked side by side, and their bond grew from mother and daughter into something more like equals and dear friends. Little Will was only 7, but he was already showing promise in both ranching and business. He was a bright, inquisitive boy, always asking questions and trying to figure out how things worked. Wade and Hannah were careful not to steer him one way or the other, wanting him to find his own path in life. In the late 1890s, South Pass City started to boom as the mines in the area grew. The town's population swelled, and so did the demand for Hannah's baked goods. She grew the business once more, bringing on more help and baking more than ever. The bakery turned into one of the most successful ventures in town, known all over the region for its quality. Wade's partnership with Patterson just kept getting stronger. When the older man started to slow down in his late 60s, Wade shouldered more and more of the work. Patterson had come to see Wade as a son, so when he passed on in 1899, he left a good part of the ranch to Wade in his will. Patterson's own children, all grown and living far away, were fine with the arrangement. They knew Wade was the one who had kept the ranch thriving. The new century rolled in full of hope and celebration. Sam was now 21, working as the full-time ranch manager. Maggie was 19 and running the bakery day to day, which let Hannah step back a little. Will was 12 and still in school, but he pitched in whenever he could. Wade and Hannah, now in their late 40s, found they were starting a new chapter in their lives. They were still full of vinegar and vim, but the heaviest daily work was no longer on their shoulders. They used this new freedom to travel a bit, taking trips to Denver and even once to San Francisco, seeing places they had only ever read about. But they were always glad to come back home to their ranch in Wyoming, to the life they had built over more than 2 decades together. In 1901, Sam met a young woman named Elizabeth Carter, and Wade and Hannah watched with knowing smiles as their boy fell in love for the first time. They were married the next year, and Sam brought his new wife to live on the ranch, in a house Wade had helped him build. Hannah welcomed Elizabeth with open arms, thankful her son had found a woman who loved him and shared his good sense. Maggie, however, was more of a free spirit and showed no interest in marrying, though she had plenty of callers over the years. She was dedicated to the bakery and seemed perfectly happy on her own. Hannah understood completely, having been older herself when she married, and she never once pushed her daughter toward a more common path. As long as Maggie was happy, that was all that mattered. Will left for university in 1906, choosing to study agricultural science so he could bring new ideas back to the ranch. Wade and Hannah were proud of his drive and sharp mind, even though they sure missed him while he was away. In 1904, Sam and Elizabeth made Wade and Hannah grandparents for the very first time with the birth of their son, Jacob. Holding that first grandbaby, Hannah felt the circle of life turn, and she remembered her own parents who had never lived to see her children. She thought of her father, wishing he could have known this kind of joy, wishing he could have seen the family she and Wade had made. More grandchildren came along as the years went by. Sam and Elizabeth had 3 more children, and Will married and started a family of his own after he came home from university. Maggie stayed devoted to her bakery, but she was a doting aunt who spoiled her nieces and nephews rotten and taught them all how to bake. Wade and Hannah grew old with grace, their hair turning to silver, but their hearts staying young. They still worked, just not as hard as they used to, and spent more time with their grandchildren, traveling whenever they got the notion. Their love had settled from the fiery passion of their early days into something deeper, a comfortable partnership so complete they often knew what the other was thinking without a single word. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children threw a huge party, inviting the whole town to the ranch for food, music, and dancing. Hannah and Wade stood there together, surrounded by their family, and the life they had built from nothing. It all started when she was baking bread by herself, and he showed up at her door, hungry and full of hope. "Did you ever, in your wildest dreams, imagine this?" Hannah asked softly, leaning her head on her husband's shoulder. "All of this from that morning you came knocking for a piece of bread." Wade put his arm around her waist and pulled her in tight. "I imagined something," he admitted. "Not exactly this, but something close. I knew from our very first talk that you were special. I knew if I could just get you to let me into your life, I'd be the luckiest man on God's green earth." "I fell for you so fast, you know," Hannah confessed. "I tried to be careful and guard my heart, but you made it impossible. You were so kind and decent, so real. And when you said you wanted my sweetness to be a part of your life for good, I knew I'd never want anything else. And I've had that sweetness every single day since," Wade murmured, kissing her on the temple. "In your baking and your kindness, in your strength and your laugh. In every moment we've had, you've given me everything I ever dreamed of, and so much more than I ever knew to ask for." They danced as the sun dipped below the Wyoming hills, with all their family and friends around them, celebrating 3 decades of love and partnership. Their children watched them with tears in their eyes, seeing the powerful bond between their parents and hoping they might build something just as strong one day. The years kept rolling on, bringing their share of changes and trials, but also so much joy and contentment. Wade finally stepped back from running the ranch, turning the reins over to Sam, but always being there for advice. Hannah retired completely from the bakery when she turned 60, leaving Maggie in charge of it all. They spent their later years just enjoying their grandchildren, tending to their home and a small garden, and traveling when they felt up to it. In 1920, they celebrated their 42nd anniversary quietly, just the 2 of them, with a simple dinner at home. They were both in their late 60s, slowing down some, but still full of life, still very much in love. They sat on their front porch watching the sunset, holding hands just like they did all those years ago when their love was brand new. "I'd do it all over again," Hannah said quietly. "Every last bit of it, every hard time and every victory, every plain, ordinary day. I would choose you and this life 1,000 times." "Me too," Wade agreed, lifting her hand to his lips, just as he had when he first asked to court her. "You have been my greatest blessing, Hannah. The best thing that ever happened to me was being hungry enough to follow the smell of your baking bread right to your door." They shared a soft laugh, the sound drifting on the peaceful evening air. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, They could see smoke curling up from the chimneys at Sam and Elizabeth's house, and from Maggie's little cottage by the bakery. Will and his family would be coming home for Sunday dinner, a tradition they kept alive for years and years. The ranch and the bakery, well, they flourished with the young ones at the helm. The legacy that Hannah and Wade built together just kept right on rolling into the future. Their kids learned a thing or two from watching them about partnership and honest work, about leaning on each other while still standing on your own 2 feet. Wade and Hannah got to see their own grandkids grow into fine adults, watching their family tree branch out into a real dynasty. They saw weddings and said their goodbyes, celebrated new babies and mourned losses, always side by side, always together. Their love was the bedrock everything else was built on, the one sure thing in a world that was always changing. In their last years, when time finally started to catch up with them, they mostly stayed close to home, happy with the simple things. They'd still bake together now and then, even if their hands weren't as steady as they used to be. They read to one another, told old stories, and had folks over who came to show respect and hear their wisdom. Wade passed on, real peaceful in his sleep, in 1925, at 73 years old. Hannah was right there, holding his hand. She grieved something fierce, but not without hope, just so thankful for the 53 years they'd had. She lived on for 2 more years, with her family all around her, keeping that sharp mind of hers right to the very end. When she died in 1927 at 71, her kids figured she'd just decided it was time to go be with Wade, that she couldn't stand being apart from him any longer. They were laid to rest side by side in the cemetery in South Pass City, with their graves marked by a simple stone carrying their names, and a line that Sam picked out. Together in life, together in eternity. Hundreds of people came to the funeral, which just goes to show you the kind of lives they lived and the mark they left on their town. The ranch and the bakery kept on running for generations. Family businesses passed down the line. Each new generation brought their own ideas, but always respected the foundation their ancestors laid. The original ranch house was kept up like a family museum, tended to with care. Lots of Hannah's baking tools and Wade's old gear were displayed for the descendants to see and remember. The story of how Hannah and Wade met became a family legend, told over and over at family get-togethers, about how he followed the smell of fresh bread right to her door, and how she let a stranger in and gave him a meal, and how from that one simple kindness, a love grew that lasted a lifetime and built a legacy that stood for generations. The young folks in the family heard that story, and they understood that the biggest things can start from the smallest moments. They learned that keeping your heart open and taking a chance on someone could change your whole world. Their great-great-grandkids, living clear into the 21st century, still talked about Hannah and Wade with a whole lot of love and respect, proud to have their blood and carry on their traditions. The bakery is still open in South Pass City, bigger and more modern now, but they still use some of Hannah's original recipes. The ranch is still in the family, a symbol of sticking with it and working hard for more than 100 years. But more than the businesses or the property, what really lasted was the example Hannah and Wade set of how to love right, how to build a life on respect and teamwork, how to handle hard times with grace and celebrate the good times with a thankful heart. They started out with next to nothing but their own skills and gumption, and from that they made something truly beautiful and lasting. On the wall of the Ranch House Museum, there's a photograph from their 40th wedding anniversary. It shows Hannah and Wade standing together on their front porch, his arm wrapped around her waist. They're both smiling at the camera, just full of joy and peace. Anyone looking at that picture could see the love shining between them, could feel how deep their bond was, even after all those years and through a simple black and white photo. Right beside that picture is a framed recipe card in Hannah's neat handwriting for the very bread she was baking the morning. Wade knocked on her door, and next to that a little plaque with a quote from Wade, from an interview he gave the local paper on their 50th anniversary. They asked him what advice he'd give young couples. He said, "Find someone whose sweetness you want to taste every day, and then spend your life making sure they feel treasured and valued. Love ain't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every single morning when you wake up. Choose love, choose partnership, choose kindness, and you'll build something that lasts forever." Those words guided their family through their own marriages, got quoted at weddings and anniversaries, and became a core part of what the family stood for. Hannah and Wade, they lived those words. They showed folks through decades of daily choices what it meant to really give yourself to another person, to ride out the storms together, and cheer for each other's wins. Their love story, which started so simply with a woman baking bread all by herself and a hungry cowboy following his nose, it bloomed into something grand and timeless. They didn't just build a family, they built a dynasty. Not just businesses, but landmarks. And not just a marriage, but a true partnership that was a model for everyone who knew them. And in the end, maybe that was their greatest legacy of all. Not the land or the businesses, or even the kids and grandkids who carried their name, but the example they set of what love could be when you tend to it carefully, protect it fiercely, and honor it every single day. It all started with that spark, that bit of chemistry when their eyes first met across her kitchen table. They built on that foundation with respect and honest talk, with shared dreams, and by always having each other's back. And they kept it strong with laughter and grace, with forgiveness and being flexible, with 1,000 little kindnesses that make a marriage work over the long haul. Future generations of their family, when facing their own troubles, looked back at Hannah and Wade as proof that true love was real. They showed that a real partnership was possible, and that building a life together was worth all the effort and sacrifice it took. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the biggest turns in life come from the simplest moments, from being open to what comes, from following your gut, even when your head tells you to be careful. Hannah was just by herself, baking her bread and humming a tune, not expecting love or for her life to change one bit. Wade was just doing his job, riding the fence line and thinking about the daily chores of the ranch. But he followed that smell of baking bread, and she opened her door. From those two small choices, everything else just fell into place. They saw something special in each other, and were brave enough to go after it, smart enough to care for it, and dedicated enough to keep it going for a lifetime. Their story was proof that fairy tales can come true, that happy endings are possible, and that love can last not just till death, but way beyond it, living on in the hearts and memories of the ones they left behind. Hannah and Wade found each other, chose each other, and spent 53 years proving every single day that they had chosen right. Their love was tested by hard times and celebrated in good times. It survived loss and welcomed blessings, and it stayed true through all the changes that life brings. And so their story doesn't end in sadness, but in celebration, with thanks for the time they had and the legacy they built. They lived their lives to the fullest and loved with all their hearts. They built something that mattered and would last long after they were gone. They started with a loaf of bread and ended with an empire. But the most important thing wasn't what they owned, but how they loved each other through every single step of their journey together. The very last thing Hannah wrote in her journal just a few days before she passed said this: "I have lived a life beyond my wildest dreams, loved more deeply than I ever knew I could, and been blessed more than I deserve. If I could talk to my younger self, alone in that kitchen baking bread, I'd tell her to open the door when the cowboy knocks. I'd tell her to take a chance on love, to trust her gut. I would tell her that the best decision she will ever make is to let Wade Northfield into her life and into her heart. And I would tell her that every day of joy, every challenge they beat together, every single moment of connection will be worth it. Love well, my younger self. Love bravely. Love with all you've got. Because true love, a real partnership, is the greatest gift this life has to offer. And once you find it, you have to hold on with everything you have." Those words, like so much of Hannah's wisdom, became a treasured part of the family history, passed down and shared, honored and remembered. And folks who visit the Ranch Museum, reading her journal and looking at the pictures and all the things from her life, they understand that they are witnessing the proof of something special and beautiful, A love story that really did last forever. A partnership that built something that mattered. A romance that began with the simple act of baking bread and grew into a legacy that would never fade away. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.